center on 119.7. Hi, looking for traffic, 354. 3 near 213.
Some battles end in a day. Others last a lifetime. We may remember heroism as a single moment, a medal, a headline, or a name. But for those who lived it, the story does not end when the shooting stops. It starts long before the first round is fired, and it carries on after the last round falls silent.
I had just bedded down maybe about 2 hours prior to the first shots fired. It wasn't uncommon to get attacked at least once a day was kind of our average. Sometimes it would be just a couple of rounds of AK fire coming in to test us, and sometimes it'd be pretty substantial. So it wasn't uncommon at 06. We just really dubbed it our Taliban alarm clock. We knew about 06 would be probably getting some action. But that morning, I remember as soon as the firefight kind of kicked off right at 06, I remember waking up, threw my kit on, powered my radio up.
October 3rd, 2009. Combat Outpost Keating, Nuristan Province, Afghanistan. A small number of soldiers were surrounded, outnumbered, and under siege. They faced one of the most devastating attacks of the global war on terror. Among them was Staff Sergeant Clint Romesha.
Just remembering those rounds coming in, like I knew it was different, but I didn't quite understand how different that day was going to be. And as that radio powered on, every defensive position was calling overwhelming enemy fire, accurate fire. We need ammo resupply. We need close air support. We need artillery support. We need the mortars up.
But this story isn't about one man's heroism. It's about what happens before the battle starts, during its darkest moments, and long after the smoke clears. It's about soldiers and the leadership that holds them together when everything seems to fall apart.
So like Zachary Kopus, he sat there for dang near 14 hours that day, holding the entire eastern side of the camp on lock. And to watch him sit there and hold that whole position, multiple times, getting pinned down by snipers, but still doing what he had to do to keep the rest of us going.
In the midst of unimaginable violence, something else emerged. Care, selflessness, and a bond forged under fire. For Clint, this battlefield became the place where he learned the deepest meaning of love and sacrifice.
Brad Larson that day, when we couldn't find Hart, didn't know where he was at. And I watched him run around that outpost 3 times to try and find Hart. It was so weird in hindsight, again, to look back. If you want to learn about love, you go to combat with your brothers. You'll see so much love. Combat is horrifying. You see a lot of things you don't want anybody to have to go see or do, but you also see a lot of love.
In this episode of Army Matters, Medal of Honor recipient Clint Romesha sits down with our co-hosts to talk about leadership under pressure, responsibility without rank, and why the mission didn't end when the battle stopped at Combat Outpost Keating. I'm Carrie Varuhaikis, and this is Army Matters.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lieutenant General Retired Leslie C. Smith, and welcome back to your next episode of Army Matters. We're so glad you decided to listen to us today. And as usual, I'm here with my co-host, my good buddy, my friend.
Your best friend, the 15th Sergeant Major of the Army, Sergeant Major of the Army retired Dan Dailey. Les, how are you today?
I'm very good. It's a Friday, and it's getting warmer. So, Dad, as a Sergeant Major of the Army, you do a lot of things. But one of the things that you do, in addition to giving all the generals a hard time that don't do PT at the Pentagon,
I did. I enjoyed that. I know
you. I know you did. I know, because you used to harass me until you saw me at the gym. You're like, okay, he's okay now. He's okay.
He's a good guy.
I'll leave him alone. That you were responsible for sitting on a lot of awards boards.
Correct.
When it came to combat operations, right? So can you tell our listeners how intense that was, how tough that was to do it, to read the citations that were there, and then
absolutely.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So by regulatory requirement, the Sergeant Major of the Army must be a board member for applications for people who are submitting recommendations for the Medal of Honor. And it is a very, very, very important job. I mean, and the reason why is because it's our nation's highest award for valor. And it takes a lot of research and a lot of time because there's no assumptions with this award. You can't speculate. There has to be factual information, right? So you put a lot of time and effort. And then we go back occasionally, frequently, and review previous awards. The farthest back one that I sat on was from the Civil War.
What?
Yes, the Civil War. And so there was all this documentation back to like President Grant. And it was just amazing. It took about 3 months just to get through it all, just to read every single, the battlefield accounts, all the things that occurred.
That's cool. So what's your favorite memory while you were serving of awarding an award to a soldier or providing an award to a soldier? What's your favorite memory?
It was when I was a battalion CSM.
Okay. Now describe to our listeners who don't know what a battalion CSM is.
Yeah, so I was a sergeant major in E9, and I was the sergeant major for the infantry battalion, which was about 1,000 soldiers. This was back when we had the large infantry battalions. And normally we would, we'd have formation every Friday in motor pool. It's called closeout formation, where every soldier is there. And that's where we do awards and promotions. So we'd bring them in front of the formation and we'd, read the award citations, in front of all their peers, and we'd give them awards. And I learned this trick from a leader. So it wasn't my idea, but I stole it from him that, I'd ask the soldier if they had a cell phone, and I would call their mother and father so they could hear us awarding the soldier. Right?
Nice.
And you'd have very interesting conversations with mom and dad. Obviously, when you first call them, they're concerned. I said, no, they're fine. They're fine. But I just want to let you know, we're about to give your son an award, because he's an outstanding soldier. But this one time, the father answers the phone. He's at work. He's on an assembly line plant for automotive assembly line. And as soon as I call him and I tell him his son's about to get an award, he goes over a supervisor and you could hear him scream, "My son's getting an award! My son's getting an award!" Right? So they shut down the assembly line.
Nice.
Put this over the loudspeaker.
That's so cool.
And we read the citation, and you could hear the whole background of all these men and women working on the assembly line going, "Yeah," and they're clapping, right? And the poor kid standing up there, he's like all embarrassed.
Yeah, yeah.
And his father is crying on the phone. Nice. That's how big of a deal it is to mom and dad. So I tried to do that every time after that is, call mom or dad and tell them, "Hey, we're about to give your son an award. We just want to share this occasion with you." So that's my story.
That's pretty touching.
It is. It is. It's an awesome thing. So, Les, why are you asking me these questions?
Why are we talking about this?
Yeah. Why are we talking about this?
Today's guest, ladies and gentlemen, he is a recipient of the Medal of Honor. And when you hear his story and what he did, you will be awe-inspired. So, Dan, should we bring our guest on?
Let's do it, Les.
Okay. Staff Sergeant Retired Clint Romesha. Welcome to Army Matters, brother.
Oh, thanks for having me today.
Clint, welcome to the show, buddy. It's amazing to have a true American hero on the show with us today, and a former 4th Infantry Division soldier, which I'm proud to have served.
Steadfast and loyal.
Steadfast and loyal. That's right. For our listeners out there, when Clint was serving the 4th Infantry Division, I was the division sergeant major at the time, and he was in a.
Luckily, I never had to go see you because.
No,
I didn't mess up that bad.
You mean he was one of those type of guys, or were you just naturally afraid of the division sergeant major?
I always did the about face when I was around the division area.
Yeah, I understand. I got you, brother.
Lay low and
Good.
Yeah.
So let's start with your early days as a soldier. Only even before that, why did you decide to serve in the Army. Now, you're from North Dakota, and you're from an Air Force area, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure you grew up around that. So tell us your background, your story.
Well, not originally. I moved up North Dakota chasing oil fields when I got out of the Army. Originally from Northern California.
Oh.
Grew up in I still love to brag about this to this day. I grew up in a town of like 100 people, went to school in a town of 500. I graduated in the top 15 of the 14 kids in my class.
We heard you.
But, growing up there, we did agriculture. We raised alfalfa, dairy cows. And then, I came from a history of military service in my family. My grandfather, World War II, he's a combat engineer, Battle of the Bulge, Normandy Beach landing. My dad served 2 tours in Vietnam, infantry guy. He never talked about it much, about any of that. It was about their brothers and the shenanigans and kind of the camaraderie and that teamwork. But both dad and granddad always impressed upon us boys, because I'm one of 5 siblings. Both my older brothers ended up serving. My oldest brother initially Army, then he retired from the Air Force a few years ago. Second oldest brother was Marine. But granddad and dad always kind of really impressed upon us, like, you don't have to be in the military, but you should give something back to this country. Graduating high school, getting ready to get out the door, and I'd already talked to the recruiter. Like I said, I knew me at college at that time was not going to be a thing. I didn't want to go waste a couple of years trying to figure out life. And I figured at that time, the Army was kind of the best route for me. It would give me time to go kind of grow up, but still have a little safety net and still some discipline on me. And most importantly, like I said, I wanted that camaraderie. So upon graduation, I talked to the recruiter. My motivation to really join was I was tired of milking cows every morning before school and digging fence posts. But I was 17 at the time. So when I went up to my dad and I asked him, hey, will you sign the papers? I can ship, just a few weeks after graduation. And dad just kind of looked at me and he said, no. Back in my mind, I'm thinking he just wants to keep me around for free labor for one more summer. But going back, like I said, dad never shared his, war stories or any of that stuff. I knew he had served and I knew he was in the infantry. And dad just very quickly looked at me and he said, hey, it's 1999. There's not a lot going on in the world. Maybe not tomorrow and maybe not in 20 years. But if you put that uniform on, you might have to go and do and see things that no one should have to go do and see. Like I said, I'm 17 years old. I think I know everything. I'm literally just thinking he's trying to keep me around. And he goes, so when you turn 18, you can make that decision on your own, but make it knowing that.
Yeah.
So like that August, as soon as I turned 18, I signed. Like I said, it was literally September 12th of 1999.
Oh, wow.
So I came in straight into basic training, Fort Knox.
So, Clint, you came in the Army as a junior enlisted guy. And can you talk to us a little bit about a leader who inspired you other than Dan Dailey?
The first leader, Sergeant Gariantes. He was actually our commander's gunner when I first got to Germany. I was in first platoon. He was the commander's gunner in headquarters platoon. So wasn't even my direct leader. But Sergeant Gariantes was one of those NCOs that immediately, like, you looked at him and you wanted to be him.
Mm-hmm.
He was every example of leading from the front. He never asked you to do anything he wasn't willing to roll up his sleeves and do it right alongside you, or something he hadn't already done and put his time in before. And he was the one that gave me the probably best leadership advice I ever got as a brand new PFC. And he said, the great leaders will change their leadership style to match the personalities of all the Joes underneath them. And he's like, and the crap leaders will expect all of them to change their personality. And you can learn a lot from great leaders, and you can learn a lot of what not to do by watching bad leaders.
Amen. We concur with both of those things. So tell us about your experience as a junior soldier during 9/11. It was a crazy time for all of us, but our listeners want to know, what were you doing? How did you react to that? And how did it make you feel?
Like I said, I had just pinned on my sergeant a couple of months before 9/11. And since we were in Vilsec, we did a lot of training.
Mm-hmm.
So we were out in the field running our tanks, and all of a sudden we get the net call come across from the squadron commander. First instinct, who on Rudy messed up? And we pull all the tanks in online. We park. They get us out. They get us in a formation. And a colonel calls anybody that had family in the New York City area, called them out of formation. And then you could see him, he pulled out one of the old sat phones and started handing it to the guys as they walk behind the Humvee. And we're like, what's going on? This is, before we all had, smartphones in our pockets and all that. And then Colonel comes out after those guys kind of call to make sure their families are good. And he comes out and he says, hey, boys, the world is going to change. We just had a terrorist attack. They hit both the towers. We're going to grab some quick chow. We're going to go to the AHA and load up ammo on the tanks.
Okay, so hold on for a second there. You use a lot of acronyms that we understand, but our listeners don't. So tell us what's a net call? What is that?
The net call is when it comes out, everybody needs to shut up and listen to the information getting pushed out on the radio. And whatever the directive is, you annotate, acknowledge, and follow.
And so what was your position? You had just made sergeant, which is a big deal for a soldier. How long had you been in the Army by then?
Right around 2 years, just over 22 months or something like that.
Okay, so you just made sergeant. So what was your position? Were you in a tank or were you in a Bradley?
I was the gunner for a brand new platoon leader at the time once again.
Oh, God bless you, sir.
I seem to keep getting the brand new LTs every time I'd get one trained up. They'd go on to bigger and better things. So.
Okay.
And then obviously as an enlisted soldier, you got to make a choice, right? So tell us what's the next step in your life in the Army? So how do you get to Fort Carson, Colorado, the 4th Infantry Division? And what made you want to re-enlist?
For me, it was, I hate to say it so simply, the Army was pretty simple to do. Like, just wear the right uniform, don't be that guy, and show up on time. To me, I really kind of excelled at those things. I really liked the purpose, direction, and motivation that I was given by so many great leaders I had. But we kind of knew that after 9/11, that's, for me and kind of my generation, I felt like, that's what we signed up for. Doing a little bit of history. I don't know if you guys know this, but tanks in Afghanistan don't really mix. So I knew being on tanks, that probably wouldn't be, I probably wouldn't see any action anytime soon. Just had my first daughter. Like I said, I never wanted to make the Army a career. It was just something I just wanted to keep doing as long as I could. So I actually re-enlisted to go to Korea. And when I was in Korea, that's when shock and awe kicked off in Iraq. And I thought to myself, I'm going to finish out my enlistment and never get a day to see combat. And that was one of those things you don't know where your path is going to take you. At that time, I was E5 promotable. I was the colonel's gunner now over in Korea. Benefit of being the colonel's gunner is you get to have his ear every now and again. And we'd gotten orders that they were going to take 2 tank companies out of 1st Tank, make a combined arms unit, and send units from Korea to Iraq. But I was able to talk to Colonel Jost and be like, hey, here's the deal. Like, I signed up to go to combat. This is what I wanted to do. And he gave me the transfer. So I got to go transfer to Alpha Tank, and that's where I went off to Iraq on my first deployment.
So Clint, please explain to our listeners about how you formed that team that day. What was their composition? And what else did they do to get ready for the mission?
So basically, they spliced together part of the 1st of the 506. Many people know them from the Band of Brothers. They were light infantry. We had 1-9 mechanized infantry, which was Bradley's dismounts or infantry guys. And then they wanted to plus up with a couple of tank companies from 172 armor. So they kind of piecemealed this kind of fighting unit together, which logistically, like, oh man, military is really good at logistics. How you move all of those armored vehicles all the way from the peninsula of Korea to Iraq. So we prepped, loaded stuff up on the boats, sent in there. We did most of our train up there in Korea. I love our infantry guys so much because we found our tank company attached to those 1st of the 506 guys. So you were attaching heavy armor with light infantry. And of course, the smack talking immediately goes back and forth.
Yeah.
The infantry guys realize how much firepower tank can bring. And we realize those guys keep the bad guys from sneaking up on us. And it's such a great way to do combined arms.
Yeah. So you did that first tour in Iraq. And the interesting thing was, I believe you then redeployed because we relocated that brigade from Korea to Fort Carson, Colorado, and actually moved families while soldiers were deployed. It was a really, really, really a crazy time. Yeah. So you get done with that deployment, and then tell us, you get to Fort Carson, right?
Yep. Get to Fort Carson. I always, when I initially enlisted, I always wanted to be a 19 Delta Cav Scout. I liked the idea of small man teams sneaking around. So I ended up, when we came back to Fort Carson, I reclassed as a 19 Delta. We reflagged that unit that ultimately 19 Infantry into a 361 Cav and a Arista Squadron. Almost a year later, we found ourselves back on that next deployment with a second ID, reflagging a fourth ID and going back to Iraq. My family kind of moved in there. Fort Carson was a really great installation, great post, because that had been the first time I'd been in the States in almost 6 years. So I kind of wanted to homestead for a while.
Yeah.
So I ended up just re-enlisting to try to stay at Carson as long as I could.
Did you know that as a member of AUSA, you have access to many benefits? From car rental to entertainment discounts, the opportunities are ample. Visit us online at ausa.org/benefits to learn more.
Hey everybody, Craig Morgan here. On March 29th in Washington, D.C., we're inviting Americans from across the country to come together for something that is really special, a true welcome home for our Vietnam veterans. I am proud to be a part of this incredible event where I'll be performing the national anthem, followed by an unforgettable, amazing concert from my buddy Gary Sinise and the Lieutenant Dan Band. The evening is going to be filled with surprises, lots of heartfelt tributes, and a great opportunity for us to thank the brave men and women who served during the Vietnam War. I hope to see you there. We ask that you go register. It is a free show, but we'd like for you to register, and we look forward to seeing you there.
For more details and to register online, visit veteransunited.com/welcome-home.
Welcome back to Army Matters. So, Clint, at this point, you're a staff sergeant. You have 2 deployments to Iraq under your belt. Now, let's move on to your trip to Afghanistan in 2009. Tell us, what was your daily life like there when you got to combat Outpost Keating? And what were the conditions like?
The briefs and everything were kind of giving us the heads up of what this outpost was going to be like. It was going to be isolated. Logistically, it was pretty tough to resupply because, hence the name, Combat Outpost Keating was named after Lieutenant Ben Keating, who unfortunately lost his life in a vehicle rollover. The mountain are so steep. We got to modify all of our mounted weapons. We got to be able to fire 90 degrees up and down. It wasn't until the first night we got there. And I remember coming off the back of the Chinook where they had to land at. They're landing in between these 3 massive mountains all the way at the bottom of the valley.
Wow.
Which makes an aircraft like that a very easy target for the enemy. And as we land, I remember coming off the back ramp and I had my night vision goggles down. Step off, I'm trying to get oriented, linking up with the new unit we're replacing. And as I kind of was scanning the area real quick, I always had this thought in the back of my mind. It's like my night vision goggles, something's wrong with them. Because normally you can always see the horizon. I just kind of remember scanning and not really seeing that. Thinking to myself, well, maybe there's something wrong with these night vision goggles or something. But it wasn't until the next morning when I woke up and I looked and I realized I never just scanned high enough. And I just thought to myself immediately, so I'm like, man, I'm going to have no freaking neck because my neck muscles are going to be so big looking up all the time. And some previous unit before us wrote up on one of the rafters in our barracks room, it never gets better. And you can take that saying and you think to yourself, man, we're getting a hot shower once every 7 days. We got maybe a hot meal once every 3 days. Just because, like I said, logistics were tough to get things in and out. Most of the time we didn't have enough power to run air conditioning and all those creature comforts in the barracks. So you're running on these, 6-8 hour patrols, sweating, that's day one. Now you got 6 more of those days of that. You're just doing your hygiene with baby wipes and this, that, and the other before you can get a shower. But those young men took that phrase and they turned it into, no matter what happened, it never gets any better, because they made every day the best day possible.
Yeah.
So you couldn't have anything get better than that.
So Clint, let's pull a thread on that a little bit. So what were some of the things that you did each day to motivate your soldiers? How did you give them optimism and purpose?
That was the big thing for us, was like any chance we could take the fight back to the enemy, we did. I think one of the best therapeutic things you could ever do is returning fire to the enemy. Learning that coming through the second Iraq deployment, where we faced a lot of IEDs and you felt like you're just sitting there taking it. The stress relief to try to take the fight to the enemy, I think was a huge motivator for the guys. That we weren't going to sit there and just be victims, no matter what the odds were stacked against us. But it was, I think, a feeding off of each other. Like I said, I was so impressed with those lower enlisted guys, having the mentality of it never gets better, them having the trust, faith, and confidence that anytime we could make a difference, we'd step up as leaders and try to make that difference for them. And it was always through those small things. We'd sit down at least once a week and have like family movie night. And we'd sit there and, we'd just have those real conversations of what life is going to be like afterwards. That was, I think, another big motivator.
Yeah.
What are we all going to do when we leave this area?
Clint, your actions that day, the morning of October 3rd, 2009, led to you receiving our nation's highest honor. And I encourage our listeners to take the time to read his citation, but fewer people know this. After that day that you talk about was so hard and your soldiers fought so valiantly, you stayed and fought for 9 more months during that deployment. Tell me about how you and the others led your soldiers during that time after this incredible fight that you went through.
That's another testament of the resiliency of those fine men. And each one of those guys, like I said, pulled up their big boy pants and they pushed through 9 more months. And it was, me and Butterman talked right away, kind of as that first night after everything kind of got settled down. And it's like, first thing we got to do is we got to get back on the horse. If we let these guys sit here and be idle, they're going to get in their own heads. So as soon as we got back to Bob Bostic, where we relocated to, we started jumping in with the other troops. Wanted to give them guys a break, because everybody had been running nonstop. Like, you're doing patrols every day, and to give someone 12 hours off in combat, man, that's one of the greatest things. It's better than even free ice cream from the DFAC.
Yeah.
And then the other big thing was, we knew, like I said, out of the 8 guys we lost that day, Gallegos, Kirk, and Sergeant Hart were my 3 team leaders. I lost 3 of my 4 team leaders that day. Then Stephen Mace. And Stephen was like the number one personality and kind of hype man for all the Joes. So I lost, one of my crucial kind of motivating Joes. And all of a sudden we're like I said, 18-man platoon, and you lose 4 and 3 of them are team leaders. Like, you got a lot of rebuilding to do on that one.
So Clint, let me ask you this. How did you, after all of that, how did you help build trust and cohesion with the new soldiers you started to receive after something like that, after losing those four leaders in your formation?
So that was 2 different conversations. The first conversations was with all the guys that were at Cop Keating, and it pulled them aside and talked to them. And it's like, look, we're never going to replace Hart. We're never going to replace Kirk. We're never going to replace Mace. None of these guys are replaceable. But what they've given us and left us, we can emulate that. And this gives some of you senior ranking specialists the chance to step up and live in their honor going forward. Now, I might get a E5 in here tomorrow, and I'm going to take your team leader spot away. Hey, that's just the way the game is. Like, suck it up. But the one thing I'm never going to hear is you talking to these replacements that they weren't there that day, because we got 9 months left and they've got to be there tomorrow. And if we got a divide of the guys who were and the guys that weren't, we will not make it. And then when the new guys came in, I said, hey, you're going to these guys that have been through some stuff. They're not going to hold it against you for not being there.
So Clint, you and your soldiers, you bring the team back together after the fight. You stay your 9 months, you redeploy, and then it was 4 years later. So I want listeners to understand this is how sacred the Medal of Honor is. It goes through a process. I have been part of that process, and you have too. I have not received it. I mean, I've been on the board as the Sergeant of the Army. But tell us, in as much detail as you can, the day you found out, and then what it was like the day you received our nation's highest honor.
Like I said, I'd already made the decision to get out of the military even before that deployment. I knew I was coming up on 10 years. Said I never thought I was going to make it a career. So I used my last year and I made my transition, and I came up North Dakota to chase oil fields at the time because that was pretty lucrative. And I'd been out for, like I said, almost 2 years. And one of the benefits of working the oil fields, you get a lot of drive time. So I'd talk to, it was so great because I'd get to talk to at least one of the guys I served with at least once a day. So I never had that idle time of being totally disconnected from my military family. And it would come up probably at least once a week talking to guys. Hey, did you ever get anything for Afghanistan? I'm like, well, no, Raz, you got your Silver Star. Or Larson, you got your Silver Star. And they all, always keep saying, well, man, they got to be doing something. And I'm like, I put all of it in a box, put it in the back of my mind, because I had the mentality that any stuff I did overseas can stay overseas. But I was out working the oil fields one day, and I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. So as soon as I answered it, I hear, hey, this is Colonel Davis, G1 from the Pentagon. Am I speaking with former Staff Sergeant Clint Romesha? I said, yeah. First thought is like, oh man, what I do, statute of limitations should be up by now. I'm in trouble. And I verify and everything. Then he says, hey, you need to come out to DC. We got something to tell you. I said, okay. I'm working 6 to 7 days a week. I don't know when I'll get some time off. I'll let you know. I'll call you back. But I end up getting out to DC. They sent me down this big conference room, and everyone's coming up congratulating me. But as they set me down, they've got 3 posters in front of me. And one's of Sal Junta, first living recipient since Vietnam. The next one's Leroy Petrie, Ranger, lost his right arm, saving his buddies from a grenade. And then the third was Sergeant Sabo. He was a Vietnam posthumous Medal of Honor. And I'm telling you, I was Charlie Brown at school. I wasn't listening to anything they were saying. It would just want. And I'm just staring at those 3 posters, trying to wrap my head around what the heck is going on. And I finally call a timeout, and I look up, and I'm like, hey, what is all this MOH stuff? And one of the colonels or whatever looks over, and he's like, oh, you don't know? Wouldn't ask a question I knew wouldn't ask if I already knew the answer. No, I'm seriously confused. And they go, oh, you've been recommended for upgrade. And I just remember looking at him. I'm like, for what? Like, I just did my job that day. Like, there were 8 guys that didn't come home. There were guys like Larson that's running around without body armor on. There's guys rotating through, like giving direct blood to Stephen Mace to keep him going. There's guys like Sergeant Hart that literally was driving into the gates of hell trying to go save Gallegos and them. Like, what did I do? I just, I had 5 guys that volunteered, didn't have to go on a counterattack. Like, it was all this, it was just very strange to me to wrap my head, because I truly feel to this day, 1, I did my job. 2, you could have plucked me out. And I know for a fact there's so many great war fighters out there that would step up to that moment. The difference is it's just time and opportunity.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact. So I still to this day don't think I did anything special. All of a sudden I got a Wikipedia page and everybody knows what I did. That was kind of one of those moments I wasn't quite ready for that. But I just remember being up on stage as they're reading the citation, and President Obama is about to put the medal around my neck. And I remember just kind of glancing out. Like I said, I was trying to pick a spot in the corner and just zone out. But I remember looking out, and the first row was my family, my dad and my brother and my mom. Right behind them was the 8 Gold Star families. And then just to the left was my Army family. Like, we're doing this together. And that brought some peace to my heart at that point. Realizing that just because I took the uniform off, I'm never going to do anything alone. But it was that moment that, like, I don't like the attention. I don't like the spotlight. But what I can do, though, is I can take my little mirror and I can deflect that spotlight into those dark spots to help others. That's been the greatest thing about the award with all the weight that comes with it.
Wow. My question for you is, all those lessons that you learned from combat and your service in the military, how did it translate into your civilian life now? Now, what you do in oil fields, and how does NCO translate to that?
I didn't realize how many skills the Army gave me until I got out in the civilian world. And it's like, what do you mean you guys don't show up on time? Like military really trains you to how to solve problems, how to fix it. Like I said, most people never even know I'm a Medal of Honor. Like, I don't want to mention that. That's not what I bring up in conversation, but I've hung out with people for 2 or 3 days. And then all of a sudden someone brings it up. Like, you're that guy? Like, hey, you're just a good dude. I think it's us as veterans, though, we do owe that to show so many Americans that majority of us are doing good. And the things that the military instilled and taught us, like I said, to have loyalty, trust, honor, integrity, selfless courage, sacrifice, is something we can all benefit from every day.
Clint, you are our nation's credentials. And I know you believe that about your soldiers too. So I'm not trying to single you out because I know you're not that kind of man. But you are. You're a symbol of what right looks like with service and sacrifice to this country. So my last and final question for you is, what would you tell the next generation about service, knowing that we need people to serve and defend this nation, regardless of what people's opinions about it? The reality is it has to happen. So what's your message to the next generation about service and the importance of it?
My message definitely would be like, you're going to be part of something that is bigger than yourself, that will reward you on so many different levels that you can't count until you look back. The hardships, you're going to learn more from your failures and your faults than you ever will from your successes. And someone's got to do it. And if we keep thinking someone else will handle it, and everybody's thinking that, no one will, and we will lose what we have established over 250 years in a moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, Clint Romesha, recipient of our nation's highest honor, the Medal of Honor. Thank you, sir, for your sacrifice and service, and more importantly, for your words of wisdom today, because everything you said, I agree with 100%. Les?
Yes. Clint, thanks so much. You can tell we're affected by this, and I want you to understand that we need you to tell your story more, and that's why we're doing this podcast today, because the nation and the world and young people coming up after us need to hear it. So thank you so much for doing that today.
Thank you.
Appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Last October at our annual meeting, we honored all Medal of Honor recipients with our Marshall Medal, AUSA's highest award. And we had a chance to sit down with Staff Sergeant Earl D. Plumley, who received the Medal of Honor for heroic actions in Afghanistan in 2013. He had this to say about someone who inspired him.
My most influential mentor was Sergeant Major Tony Bell. He was my first Sergeant Major in Special Forces, and he was just a profound leader and awe-inspiring. And it really showed me how much effect an NCO can have on an organization if they're willing to take on that responsibility.
To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Army Matters is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association, member-supported, Army-connected. Visit us at ausa.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission, educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and supporters of a strong national defense. Today's episode was hosted by Lieutenant General Retired Les Smith and SMA Retired Dan Dailey, and anchor hosted by Carrie Barrow-Heckes. Andy Bosnack is the associate producer and supervising sound editor. Major Ryan Crane is the writer, and Ellen Toner is the content editor. Umzinga Curry is the executive producer. Carrie Barrow-Heckes is a senior producer, and Savannah Campbell-Smith is the producer. Be sure to subscribe to Army Matters wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a review. As you know, we love seeing stars in the Army, especially if it comes in the form of a 5-star review. AUSA's Army Matters podcast can also be heard on Reach Across America Radio on Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app with a search of the word Wreath. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. AUSA's Army Matters podcast's primary purpose is to entertain. The podcast does not constitute advice or services. While guests are invited to listen, listeners, please note that you're not being provided professional advice from the podcast or the guest. The views and opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect the views of AUSA. I'm LaSharon Duncan, hoping you have a great Army day. Hooah!